They are the blade that haunts the shadows. From darkness they strike with a vengeance colder than the void, shredding the enemies of humanity in haunted silence and ice-cold fury. Commanders, champions, and rebels alike, and torn amidst the flash of their lightning claws, the only illumination before fading back into the shadows. They are killers distilled to their purest form, eradication incarnate. Pinpoint accuracy and execution to ensure they never miss their mark. Where other chapters flaunt trophies and bask in the glow of martial splendor, these warriors embrace only the death that they deal. For these harbingers of death do not stand on walls as so many of their cousin chapters do. They slip past them. They prepare, infiltrate, adapt, and overcome. They stalk from within the shadows, shattering their prey in their sanctuaries of strength, bleeding their enemies of hope and cohesion. These assassins, each one a singular force of ruin, produces the same disarray as an entire army. Panic, terror, confusion are their closest allies. Darkness, their second skin, their gift, their aegis, both their blessing and their curse. In a galaxy of unspeakable horrors, where abominations prey upon the innocent and terror grips even the bravest of soldiers, there are few who can stand against such terrors. Fewer still who can become the nightmares of nightmares. They are the hidden hand, the vengeance of the dark, the retribution of the shattered. They are no vainglorious warriors, no heroes of the parade ground, no vaunted ideal of humanity's warriors. They are the Emperor's swiftest scions of death, arrows loosed with only one end: destruction and death to all in their path. The haunted hunters, the dark deliverers, the sons of Corvus Corax, the remnants of the 19th Legion. They are the Raven Guard. Welcome one and all, I am Azazel, and for better or worse, you have stumbled your way onto my video introducing the Raven Guard. This former Legion, now chapter, are, I confess wholeheartedly, my favourite of the bunch. My dark, moody Raven boys have been through a lot, continue to suffer the effects of their lineage, and yet remain steadfast, stoic, loyal, and savage. But for now, this remains as an introduction to the chapter. To fully dive into their histories, tragedies and victories and losses will take the time of several videos. Be prepared now. Steel your hearts and gird your minds as we enter the most horrific place imaginable. The place where hope goes to die, and where thirsting gods rack the souls of billions, while directing madness on the stage of our galaxy as easily as puppeteers pull on strings. Welcome to the 41st millennium. First things first, I do apologize if my voice sounds different. Unfortunately, a computer glitch left me with a week and a half's work completely unsalvageable, and now I'm having to re-record almost everything. So here we go. As always, let us begin at the beginning. For those of you new to the hobby, to understand who we are talking about. Only then can we investigate their roots, their reasonings, their whys and wherefores, to how they have become the chapter we know today. The Raven Guard are unlike many of their cousin legions. While inspiring soliloquies designed to whip up warriors into a battle frenzy are favoured by many chapters, the Raven Guard eschew such ideals. For them, the art of war is a calculated, precise, furious matter. They are masters of stealth and speed. Their goal is to decapitate the head of the snake, or disrupt vital supply chains, or to divide enemy forces. Once an enemy discovers that the Raven Guard are their foes, it is usually too late to prevent their goals. More often than not, their plans have already come into fruition. Their skin is a deathly white, a stark frame to their black hair and black eyes. Their homeworld is a small moon known as Deliverance, formerly known as Lycaeus, that orbits the forge world of Kievar. To all who view their fortress monastery, it is a ruin. a barely functioning adaptation of the mining prison facilities it used to be. Its rusting, almost broken visage points to a fallen, weakened chapter, a weak imitation of what it used to be. And yet nothing could be further from the truth. For in the Raven Guard's doctrine lies misdirection. Where you are strong, let the enemy see you as weak, and where you are weak, let them see you as strong. This visage of a weakened fortress monastery is skin-deep only. Designed to lure in the unsuspecting, this fortress monastery is one of the most well-defended in the entirety of the Imperium. The chapter master of the Raven Guard is Kayvan Shrike, the Master of Shadows, who took up the mantle when his predecessor, Corvin Severax, died at the hands of the Tau commander Shadowsun during the Prefectia campaign. And while I am glad that the Tau have a major recorded victory, I am saddened that it happened at the cost of one of my Raven boys. It was due to the strategic genius and quick thinking of Kayvan Shrike, the then Shadow Captain of the 3rd Company, that Shadowsun and her troops were driven off. It is in Kayvan Shrike that the tenets of the Raven Guard hold strong. Intelligence, practicality, and adaptability in warfare to turn the odds of any battle in their favor. So let's have another few books on them. Please, Games Workshop, I'm begging you. Aside from naturally being masters of stealth and guerrilla warfare through training and doctrine practices, certain members of the Raven Guard also have an affinity for the darkness that goes far beyond natural and trained ability. Wraith Slipping is the name given to the collection of techniques and training that make their Astartes so subtle, so unseen, so stealthy. But for some among the Raven Guard, this goes a step further. Shadow walking is something else entirely. A gift from their Gene Father, their Primarch, the ability to disappear entirely, to allow one's entire being to escape from the notice of those around themselves. Just before anyone shouted me in the comments, it isn't invisibility in itself, it is the ability to not be seen by others. But I'll make an entry on that in the future. Once known as the Mor-Dethan, these Shadow Masters were an elite unit, deployed to undertake the most devious of stratagems and outmaneuver the most careful of opponents. To their enemies, it would seem as if they emerged from pools of darkness. This psychic gift allowed them to be undetected to any and all. Apart from salamanders, but that's another story in itself. Their obsession with stealth and the advantages it gives in war does not merely extend to troops and training, but also to their technologies. For the Raven Guard Primarch successfully installed a technology known as reflex shields to their ships during the 31st millennium. This technology, this variant of the Void Shield, allows their ships to pass unknown and unregistered on enemy sensors. Monstrous ghosts of the void slipping through the endless black. While a Void Shield is designed to deflect incoming munitions and projectiles into the warp, the Raven Guard's reflex shields are inverted upon themselves, displacing the radiation, vox, and thermal signals that usually emanate from a voidcraft into the warp. If the Raven Guard wish to move unseen, no one will know. In battle, they also make extensive use of stealth craft such as Whisper Cutters and Shadow Hawks. But enough of the basics. Let's look at their origins, their Primarch, their tragedies, and their curses. Origins of the Raven Guard. I will confess that I have an entry on Corvus Corax on the way, and that will go a great deal to describing the origins of the Raven Guard. So if you're watching this a little while after its release, I'll probably recommend taking a look at that. But for now, a quick look at Corvus Corax. There is a reason for this, so do bear with me. Corvus Corax was the Primarch of the 19th Legion. Lost upon the tides of the warp, he landed upon the moon of Lycaeus and was swiftly adopted by the mining slaves there. Protected and hidden among this moon filled with political prisoners and dissidents, where cruelty was a game for the Gowlers, he knew human cruelty as he aged to maturity. Each day he learned of his skills of stealth, and each day he witnessed brutality of the highest order. Each moment unable to free his keepers, his carers, his friends, he was filled with an ice-cold fury that burned within him. Rage at cruelty unfettered. Rage at the hands that wielded the batons of injustice. Rage at those who would enslave and beat and humiliate those whom they considered fair game. It would take time, it would take planning, it would take determination, but Corvus Corax raised the prisoners of Lycaeus in a guerrilla rebellion that swept across the facilities and freed them from the Gowlers of Kievar. No more would any display cruelty and sadism before him. His people, his brothers and sisters would be free. Do bear this in mind as we go to the origins of the 19th Legion. After the scattering of the Primarchs, the Emperor began his Space Marine project, for he still held gene seed of his lost sons. While he only had one son kept in secret, he no longer had the other 19 Primarchs. But he could create the Astartes with which he would conquer the galaxy. The 19th Legion would be his hidden hand, the guillotine of recidivists and would-be rebels. Across his burgeoning imperium, they would reveal themselves with a simple threat: kneel or die. There were no boundaries that they could not cross, no safe haven from which enemy commanders could plan their sabotage. Nothing was beyond their reach. Not so different in how we know the Raven Guard to be today. However, there was one key difference. For in that time, the 19th Legion recruits were primarily recruited from the Xeric Tribes of Terra. Savage warriors, eager to slay both rival tribes as well as neighbouring areas, they were indeed masters of guerrilla warfare in their own right, and yet they believed in total compliance, to the point at which any conquered peoples must be watched with a steely glare and a gun to the head in order to discourage recidivism. If a spark of rebellion even hinted at fanning to life, they would be there, with fury and destruction. Alongside this trait was a propensity for savage butchery and a respect for only the strong. Oderint dumma tuent, let them hate as long as they fear. Alongside this, for almost 200 years, the Raven Guard fought without their Primarch. During this period, they often fought under the command of Horus Lupercal. He came to value their worst aspects and encouraged their use in his campaigns. In many ways, these Terran-born Raven Guard viewed themselves as loyal to Horus, as a hunting dog values the master who sets it loose. In their conquests within the Emperor's wars, they began to resemble the Gowlers of Kievar, that Corvus Corax knew so well, and loathed with his entire being. It must be a strange feeling, to reunite with one's sons and see monsters, to witness the worst parts of what can be and see them reflected within mirrors of yourself. Perhaps it was at the horror of seeing the values that his Terran sons held, or a stark reminder of what Corvus himself could have become had he landed in the hands of the Kievaran Gowlers rather than the Lycaean prisoners. But it became no secret that he despised what his legion was. Immediate changes were implemented within the Raven Guard. No longer would the savage, vindictive ideals of the Xeric tribes thrive. Many officers of differing ranks were reassigned to non-command roles. Those too high-ranking, too bloodthirsty to control, too wild and dangerous to tame were banished. In name and colours only would they be Raven Guard. They served as predation fleets in the dark, commanded to areas beyond the front line of the expansion. forever content to serve their death-dealing ways beyond sight, beyond mind of the rest of the Legion. Side note, it is these savage Terran sons that give rise to the theory that the Carcharodons, the Space Sharks chapter, are the descendants of those Raven Guard, and that these banished sons still serve in penance 10,000 years after their exile. Side note over. This reorganization of the Legion removed many of the Terran-born scourge from the ranks of the Raven Guard, as newer warriors were raised into the ranks from Kievar, and yet it did not remove them entirely. To deplete the Raven Guard's strength too soon would have been a terrible miscalculation, and Corvus needed the experience of many of the Terran-borns. The final cleansing would come at the hands of the Unsighted Kings, and the Battle of Gate 42. I will make an entry on this at one point in the future, but suffice to say that this was a turning point for the Raven Guard, and a look behind the veil at who Horus Lupercal already was at the time. The Battle of Gate 42. The Unsighted Kings were a horrific abomination. Parasitic, gestalt monsters that forced an entire cluster to dance to their tune. Unfortunately, the worlds affected were ones that had been hard-won by Horus Lupercal. The arrogance, the gall, the hubris. It raged within Horus as a personal slight against his ego. This pathetic man-child swore to take back the populations from this Xenos threat. Unfortunately for all, he was already War Master. Placed first among equals, his word was law when it came to the Great Crusade. It was he who assigned Corvus, Corax, and the Raven Guard to be the first to wade into the guns of the defenders and assault Gate 42, a formidable bastion of strength. Why, for all of the genius intellect that Primarchs possess, would a commander order a legion whose strength in warfare lay in feint, strike, and precision to attack a bastion full on? I have a theory about that which I will explore in another video, that Corvus Corax was most like the Emperor above and beyond all his brothers, and Horus could see it and was jealous. Not only that, but Corvus could see the truth of character behind his brother Primarchs, and Horus feared that too. But that's a theory for another entry when I can explore it at my own pace. Nevertheless, despite logic, protestation, and counter-proposals, the Raven Guard were assembled to assault Gate 42, to march into the enemy guns in their weakest tactic. Knowing the bloodthirsty toll it would take on the Raven Guard, Corvus assigned the last of his Terran-born savage remnants to the front. Their temperaments would either see them reap a bloody toll on the gate's defenders, or die in the process. And die they did, by the thousands. Despite Corvus leading his warriors from the front, the Raven Guard's numbers were depleted by the end of the battle, leaving them the smallest of the legions. Horus, of course, swept in at the end to claim the final victory for himself. I don't believe I need to say anything about my thoughts on that matter. Now I mention this entire event for one effect that it would have upon the Raven Guard going forward, into the Horus Heresy. With almost all the Terran-born commanders dead, there were few who remembered the days serving under Horus, few who remembered those ties of loyalty that once remained. With that thread severed, the Raven Guard would be united, and although small, they would be loyal to one another. They would not be torn apart by schisms, as many other legions would be, although that would mean little when it came to their shattering. A legion shattered. The Horus Heresy was the time of the impossible. Not just the powers that lie in the veil of unreality, pulling back the curtain and gazing hungrily upon the material realm, but of bonds shattered, oaths forsaken, and ties severed. betrayal, butchery, and savagery. We could detail Nicona Sharokin's near assassination of a Primarch, Corvus's words to Russ, the various battles and fleets that prowled the stars, but to do so would be to elaborate on stories and characters that require their own telling. Instead, we shall focus on what forged the Raven Guard in those trying times. What scars lie within their memories? What trauma hardened the souls of the Legion and carries them through to this day? We shall start with the most heinous of betrayals, a moment marked in horror and bloodshed, when treachery flew in the dust-ridden atmosphere of Istvan V, the Drop Site Massacre. For at this moment in time, Horus flew his banners as a traitor and defector from the Imperium of Mankind. He proclaimed loudly his rejection of the Emperor. Alongside him stood his brothers Fulgrim, Mortarion, and Angron. There, the sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, the Death Guard, and the World Eaters carved out a defense. 7 legions were dispatched to deal with this unspeakable betrayal. 7 legions against 4. A bloody, horrific battle was expected. Yet the outcome was not questioned. A loyalist victory would be hard-won, bloody and brutal, yet it would come. The advance force consisted of the Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard, under their respective Primarchs Vulcan, Ferrus Manus, and Corvus Corax. The reserve force of Night Lords, Alpha Legion, Word-Bearers, and Iron Warriors would land afterwards and provide support to launch secondary attack waves. The 3 legions in the first wave cut a bloody toll across the defenders. Brutal Astartes on Astartes warfare, never before imagined, echoed across the empty plains of Istvan. Spent ammunition littered the ground amidst the blood and viscera of fallen brothers on both sides. Eventually, the reserve force arrived, and the 3 legions fell back to regroup and unite with their reinforcements. Only they were not there to reinforce. Even as the battle-weary wounded brothers of the Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard approached their cousin legionaries, desperate for respite and support, they were fired upon from all sides. The first wave had become trapped in a killing ground, slaughtered like animals in a pen. The legionaries, already far fewer in number than ever before, dropped like flies. It was a butcher's field. Of the 3 loyal Primarchs who arrived on Istvan with their legions, only one would leave of their own volition. Ferrus Manus fell at the hands of his brother Fulgrim, decapitated by the brother he loved most dearly. Vulcan would be taken, tortured, and killed again and again by his brother Conrad Kurz. Only Corvus led a bloody retreat through the enemy lines, waged a guerrilla war against his traitorous brothers and their legionaries. Day after day of bloody slaughter, struggle, and retreat saw he and what remained of the loyalist forces extricated from Istvan. But the cost was simply too high. 80,000 Raven Guard warriors landed with their Primarch to deliver justice to the traitors on Istvan. Only 5,000 fled into the void once the battle was over. 75,000 Astartes brothers and sons lay dead and dying on the hellscape of Istvan, left in the muck and the dirt and the dust. They would never know why their cousins betrayed them, never know for what reason their lives would be butchered. It was and still is a scar on the soul of the Raven Guard. They were a shattered legion, a fragment of what they once were. The Raven Guard would play little more of a role in the Horus heresy. Many sons took to the stars to wage guerrilla warfare on the fleets of the War Master. While they may have reaped a bloody toll and learned to be far more effective than their numbers may have suggested, they were ants taking bites out of an enormous beast. Such were the War Master's numbers. However, for the Raven Guard lay one more chance to become a fighting force once more. One last opportunity to become the legion they had lost. For the Emperor gifted Corvus with secrets untrusted to any of his brothers. Details and material surrounding the Primarch project. With this in hand, Corvus returned to Deliverance and launched the Raptor project. The goal was rapid transformation of a human into an Astartes in order to bring his legion back to strength. And it worked. In the span of a few weeks, Corvus could transform an aspirant into a space marine. Not just a marine, but something stronger, faster, and more durable than a regular Astartes. This blessing, this miracle would see the Raven Guard return to strength in no time at all. Of course, the aspirants would need to be put through trials to gain battle experience, but the chance was there. The Raven Guard would live again. But the tale of the Raven Guard is not glorious, and never do they have a happy ending. For the Alpha Legion struck. Operatives in the guise of survivors of the Istvan massacre, wearing the faces of fallen Raven Guard, infiltrated the ranks. The Raptor project created approximately 500 Space Marines, until the Alpha Legionaries tainted the gene seed, wiped the records and stole away the pure material and knowledge required. The final aspirants of the Raptor project would become mutated horrors, twisted abominations, mindless monsters. The Raven Guard would not rise again as a legion. Try as they might, fighting bloody battles across the stars, they would not be there when Terra fell. They would not be there to save the Emperor. They could barely save themselves. As for the Raptors, those who did not twist into mindless beasts immediately would beg for the chance to serve and die in battle before their mutations took over. Horns, fangs, claws, and all manner of physical malattributes would force themselves over their bodies. Piece by piece, the sanity of these raptors would be torn away amidst the hopelessness and impotence of their situations. What happened to those final raptors, we shall elaborate upon in a moment. Corvus would leave his legion. He would not be lost, killed, or captured. The sons would be abandoned by their father, a man who had known too much loss. His brothers had betrayed him. His sons had been slaughtered. His hope of renewal snatched away. His father fallen into ever-living death. He even came to despise his own self, a revelation of his genesis that became too much for him to bear. But finally, his fallen raptors, some teetering on the precipice of insanity, some already caught within the throes of madness, lay within the Apothecarion within the Ravenspire on Deliverance. Howling, twisted shadows, mockeries of human form, frothing, slathering maws garbled and wailed under their mutations. Those that still held some semblance of sanity gazed at their Primarch through pitch-black eyes, sorrow and understanding bleeding out of those glassy voids, knowing what must happen, and forgiving their father. Yet Corvus would not forgive himself. He put an end to their miserable existences out of love and duty, out of a care for his sons, his responsibility. He would isolate himself for a year thereafter before revealing himself once more. His final message to his living sons, Nevermore, before launching into the void to hunt down his traitor brothers. But echoes of that dark time still resonate throughout the Ravenspire. Although it was a millennia ago, the rooms having been purged and sealed, that bloody night still haunts the forbidden Apothecarion. Once a year, on Far Moon Night, wounded howls and cutthroat snarls echo from that forbidden area, as if someone, or some things, are caught in the throes of a slaughter. The Raven Guard's first company stand guard every year against anything that could escape the Apothecarion. Although nothing has, that does not mean that nothing ever will. The Raven Guard are, at least to me, the perfect blend of grim, dark, tragic warriors. They have a practicality to them that is unrivaled, except by perhaps some of their successor chapters. They abjure chaos and tyranny. Their prowess at stealth is only matched by their ferocity in battle. They are a chapter always on the brink of extinction, thanks to unstable gene seed and the relentlessly demanding casualties of war. But there is one more thing that I admire about them, perhaps for more personal reasons. The Sable Brand. The Sable Brand is a curse, a genetic flaw, a blemish on these transhuman warriors. It strikes a few of them, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. In physical aspect, the only change that occurs is within the eyes. Their standard black eyes fill the entire ocular orb, creating a stark contrast with their bleach white skin. But the main effects of the Sable Brand are mental. Woe, dejection, misery, the horrors of war, the pointlessness of life itself is magnified exponentially. Many afflicted with the Sable Brand are plagued with horrifying visions of death and despair, which in turn become indistinguishable from the horrifying experiences that they share on the battlefield. Those afflicted with the Sable Brand often fall into suicidal charges on the battlefield, whether in order to make the enemy suffer or to bring about an end to their own is up for debate. Perhaps each case is up to the individual. And yet they fight. The Raven Guard will always step up when they are needed, always put one foot in front of the other. Maudlin and suffering they may be, but they will forever drive through that fog, that fatigue, that pall of utter despair and make it through, one way or another. I'm not a huge fan of sticking real-world labels on sci-fi setting concepts. For me it has always seemed a bit reductionist, and yet it is impossible to deny that these concepts do indeed come from real-world problems. In this case at least, I find a great affinity with the Raven Guard. To feel those feelings and come out the other side, no matter what it takes, one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. Perhaps you disagree, and that's okay. But I think I've perhaps ranted on enough and maybe projected a bit too personally on this entry. But hey, it's my channel. I hope it wasn't too long, and if you too have ever felt the touch of the Sable Brand, do feel free to reach out if necessary, for Corvus and the Emperor. With that said, thank you for listening. Please do drop a like, a comment or a subscribe, and constructive criticism is always welcome, for without you, no one would be listening. Now do enjoy your day or night, and I hope you've indulged in some escapism from reality, for that's why we are here, isn't it? Until next time.